Excellencies and Honorables, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this panel. My name is Uduaka Mimo. It's a huge pleasure for me to moderate what is clearly a popular and timely conversation on the Partnership for Illicit Finance, or PIF. I'll remind you before we carry on that the social media hashtag is AFDBAM2016 for the African Development Bank, and the U.S. State Department will be tweeting from @EconEngage. That's @EconEngage. I'll introduce the panelists in a moment, but as you can see, we're going to hear a range of views and perspectives on illicit finance and the partnership in particular. Why should we care? Allow me to conduct an unscientific poll. How many of you looked into the Panama Papers to see whether your country was represented, whether there were people from your country represented? And I'm hearing here that we saw countries represented. Africa, I think at the last count, had 17 countries represented. And so, in spite of the prevailing narrative of a continent dependent on external aid, Africa loses so much money, an estimated $50 billion annually, that is earned, transferred, or used illegally, that we have been described as a creditor to the rest of the world. That money should be in Africa, working for Africans. And so out of the US-Africa Summit in 2014, the Partnership for Illicit Finance was born. It builds on the work of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows led by the former South African President, Thabo Mbeki. And so to introduce our panelists, from Kenya, the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury, Henry Rotich. From Sierra Leone, the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Patrick Conte. From the United States, the Honorable Assistant Secretary for International Markets and Development, Ms. Marisa Lago. From Senegal, the Honorable Secretary General of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Sheikh Tidiane Diop. From Burkina Faso, the Honorable Director of Budget in the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Edith Clemence Yaka. From Liberia, the Honorable Auditor General, Madam Usador Gay. From the African Development Bank, the Honorable Vice President of Finance, Charles Bouma, will join us later. And completing our lineup is the Bank President himself, His Excellency Dr. Akin Adesina. So I'll start with you, Dr. Adesina. This was born out of the US-Africa Leaders Summit. Why is the bank supporting it? Okay.
Well, thank you very much. First, let me thank Assistant Secretary Lago and the U.S. Treasury for organizing this very important event. I couldn't think of anything more important when we're talking about development. And development needs a lot of resources. Whether you're talking of access to water, to health, to sanitation, to education, to infrastructure, it doesn't really matter what it is. You need money. But what's very sad is when that money is there, and that money is actually literally stolen. The money that belongs to people, its development should never be found in people's personal accounts. When you are introducing the panel, you talk about the Panama newspapers. We shouldn't have to wait for Panama newspapers to find out how people are using resources on our continent. No, we need greater responsibility, accountability, probity in how public financing is used. I think that most of the times, when we are asking for increased financing for development, we need to mobilize the resources we have and also block the leakages that we currently have. I think in this particular case, it's like a thief that you find in a room. If you have a room that you have a lot of thieves in it, you can either deal with them by taking a gun and shooting, or you simply can turn on the light. When you turn on the light, bad guys that do bad stuff in the dark, they disappear. And I think that's what this meeting is all about. This partnership on illicit finance is about turning the light on how resources are used and how they should be used very well. the amount of resources that Africa loses is even more than what the moderator talks about. It's not $50 billion. I've seen $60 billion. I've seen other figures saying $100 billion. Whatever the amount is, no dime that belongs to government resources should be stripped off, used for personal benefit. It should be for the public good. And I think that in trying to do this, a number of areas that I would just like to emphasize. It's first to thank the U.S. Treasury Department for working with all the countries in developing these action plans. In some of the countries that you see here, I would like to encourage all countries to be part of this. You know, to be part of something where there's light, except you have something to hide. I think we all should collectively work together to increase transparency in public financial management. The second area has to do with, it's not just the Africans themselves alone, African countries. It takes two to tango. There are so many multinational companies that also operate in Africa. They have more tax lawyers, accountants that the entire country has. And therefore, they know what the loopholes are, base shifting, and all kinds of things that they do to avoid paying resources that should actually go into African countries to support them to mobilize resources for their own development. That also has to be dealt with. This problem cannot only be fixed by Africa alone. There has to be an international cooperation. And that's why I'm really a big fan of what's been done here by the U.S. Treasury in getting everybody together to focus on this particular issue. At the end of the day, each one of us must be the ones that hold the torchlight. I think there has to be a lot of support for whistleblowing policies. I think there has to be a lot of support for civil society. There has to be a lot of support for parliamentary groups that will be able to actually look into books and actually say, are the books clean or not? Are the resources being used well or not? And I think there has to be a lot of support for tax administration so that people can collect the right taxes and make sure that it's being used properly. Finally, what's the African Development Bank doing? Africa may have a lot of poor people, but Africa is by no chance a poor continent. If you look at it today in terms of the amount of resources, natural resources, that Africa has, discovered natural resources, is about $82 trillion. And so what's Africa doing with poverty with that? Well, it all comes down to how those natural resources are harnessed, managed, and used for growth in a way that is very inclusive. And I think that's why the African Development Bank is actually developing a strategy on its own of how we are going to do policy, technical support with regard to illicit financial flows. And we're looking forward to very strong collaboration with U.S. Treasury and several others. Secondly is we have the Africa Natural Resources Center, which is a center we set up to help our countries to, whether it's minerals, metals, agricultural, forest products, whatever it is, to be able to negotiate proper royalties and taxes for everything that they have. And that's working very well. We also have the Africa Legal Support Facility that has a bunch of very smart lawyers that can actually look and say, what kind of deal are you getting into? I think that is also one thing that we bring as the African Development Bank to it. And finally is that we believe that in partnership with President Thabo Mbeki's panel and others that are working on this particular issue, we need to continue to give greater visibility to this because there must be accountability for public resources. There has to be accountability. When we talk about this, I think it's very important, therefore, to constantly have engagement. And so I commit that the African Development Bank will commit to organizing, again with you, a similar forum like this. Hopefully we can have a continuation of this on the sideline of the World Bank meetings later during the year. But also during the annual meeting next year, we'll have a bigger room. Hopefully we have many more countries that will have signed up into this partnership. I am delighted that all of you are interested in making sure that we mobilize resources. Let's mobilize all that we have, but let's block all the leakages that exist. So thank you very much, and I wish you fruitful deliberations.
Thank you very much, President Adesina. To clarify, there are just 8 countries in this partnership, some of which are represented up here. And so from Senegal, Mr. Diop, because yours is the first African country to develop its own national action plan. So you're in the best position to tell us why this partnership is so important to you. Oh, no, there's a microphone in front of you, so you can just speak from there. Thank you.
C'est bon.
Yes. Yes.
Merci, Madame la modératrice, honorable ministre, honorable représentant panéliste, chers invités. Je voudrais, à l'entame de mon propos, d'abord présenter à notre Assemblée les excuses du ministre de l'Économie, des Finances et du Plan du Sénégal, qui avait prévu de faire ce panel, mais qui a été rappelé au pays pour des urgences et qui m'a chargé de venir le suppléer en participant à ce panel, compte tenu de l'expérience du Sénégal, qui est co-leader avec les États-Unis depuis le début. Je voudrais également, à ce niveau de mon propos, féliciter la BAD, qui a accompagné cette initiative et qui aujourd'hui a inscrit ce point à l'agenda de son Assemblée générale. Ça démontre d'une bonne appropriation par les autorités de la BAD, parce que nous avons besoin que cette initiative soit appuyée au-delà de l'engagement politique des États. Je voudrais rappeler que cette initiative est née d'une idée conjointe du président Obama et du président Macky Sall du Sénégal lors du sommet États-Unis-Afrique d'août 2014. Aujourd'hui, 2 réunions internationales se sont déjà tenues en juin 2015 et en février 2016 à Dakar, et nous nous réjouissons de voir que le nombre de pays participant à l'initiative a augmenté, ce qui dénote de l'intérêt que les pays africains en particulier accordent à cette initiative. Et une réunion sous-ministérielle, pour le rappeler, s'est tenue à Washington en avril 2016 en marge des assemblées de la Banque mondiale, et aujourd'hui nous sommes réunis à Lusaka sous le prétexte des assemblées générales de la BAD pour parler de cette question éminemment importante pour l'ensemble du monde, mais particulièrement pour les pays africains. L'objectif de cette initiative, pour le rappeler, c'est de lutter contre les flux financiers illicites qui comportent 2 conséquences majeures, surtout pour nos pays africains. La première conséquence, M. Adesina l'a dit tantôt, de même que Madame la modératrice, elle se traduit en termes de perte de recettes publiques. Aujourd'hui, les rapports de la Banque mondiale démontrent à suffisance que le volume financier sorti de l'Afrique du fait de ces activités illicites est évalué autour de 60 milliards de dollars, soit plus que l'aide publique au développement reçue par les pays du continent africain et plus que la dette extérieure des pays africains. Ça veut dire que cet argent resté en Afrique aurait permis de financer des projets et programmes de développement, notamment des projets et programmes de lutte contre la pauvreté. Voilà pourquoi nous avons un premier grand intérêt à adhérer, et j'invite les pays qui ne l'ont pas encore fait à rejoindre cette initiative qui présente énormément d'intérêt, et on y reviendra dans le cadre des détails techniques des panels. La deuxième conséquence, elle est sécuritaire, parce qu'aujourd'hui, il est établi clairement que si je prends le contexte sous-régional africain, UMOA, CEDEAO, pour parler plus globalement, nous avons sur la bande sahélo-sahélienne aujourd'hui une manifestation d'une grande délinquance aujourd'hui qui déstabilise certains de nos pays. On voit ce qui se passe au Nigeria, on voit ce qui se passe au Nord Mali, et aucun pays africain aujourd'hui pris individuellement n'est en mesure de juguler ce fléau, qui a aujourd'hui des aspects assez transversaux, transnationaux, qui demandent que les pays fassent bloc pour efficacement donner une réponse appropriée à ce fléau des temps modernes qui est le terrorisme. Je voudrais également insister sur le comment nous allons y parvenir. Sur la base d'une proposition des États-Unis, nous avons retenu que chaque pays adhérent à l'initiative puisse élaborer un plan d'action national. Je reviendrai peut-être spécifiquement sur le détail du plan d'action du Sénégal dans les discussions thématiques du panel, mais je voudrais juste à ce niveau rappeler les objectifs stratégiques qui sont de 3. Première chose, promouvoir la transparence gouvernementale, lutter contre la corruption et les pertes de recettes en raison d'activités criminelles, et également lutter contre la corruption pour la réduction des comptes et l'impunité. Nous allons y parvenir naturellement si nous sommes unis. Et en cela, aujourd'hui, il faudrait qu'on comprenne que le contrôle citoyen et le développement de la société civile et une meilleure structuration de l'initiative aussi, et une meilleure articulation avec d'autres initiatives, le président Adesina en a parlé, notamment au niveau de l'Union africaine, avec le comité de haut niveau présidé par le président sud-africain Thabo Mbeki, dont le premier rapport est sorti en février 2015. Il faudrait qu'on puisse articuler également, parce que je vois le directeur du GIABA, avec les initiatives du même objet qui sont initiées dans ce cadre. Nous avons aujourd'hui plusieurs combats à mener sur l'étendue du territoire africain, du continent africain. Mais je suis d'avis, on reviendra dans le détail, que s'il y a un combat, de mon point de vue, et c'est le point de vue des plus hautes autorités sénégalaises, en l'occurrence le président Macky Sall, qui mérite d'être mené conjointement avec l'ensemble des autres pays, c'est le combat aujourd'hui contre les flux financiers illicites, au-delà des dégradations avancées que cela cause aux pays africains. Donc j'invite les pays qui ont adhéré à finaliser et à adopter leur plan d'action et à les mettre en œuvre, et les pays qui n'ont pas encore adhéré à joindre l'initiative, parce que nous devons passer du temps de la parole au temps de l'action. Je vous remercie. Merci.
So thank you, Mr. Diop. That's a fairly comprehensive overview of the PIF and its role on the African continent. Now, Ms. Lago, the U.S. has also completed its own national action plan. What happens once this plan is completed? You know, what does implementation look like?
Thank you for the opportunity. Now, I want to start by giving special thanks to Secretary General Diop. When Minister Ba was called back to Capitol, he on no notice just stepped up and came out here just to participate in our panel. So thank you very, very much. I also want to thank you, Mr. President, for using the analogy of light. Earlier on in my career, I worked at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, where our saying was, transparency is the best medicine. That was in reference to capital markets, but I think the same is equally true when we talk about illicit finance. Now, at the absolutely highest levels of the U.S. government, and this goes all the way up to President Obama, we are committed to not just identifying, but stopping illicit finance. Why? For the reasons that have been so eloquently laid out. I mentioned at the highest levels of our government, the PIF, this partnership, is a whole-of-government initiative for us. It involves agencies across our government, and I want to give a special shout-out to our Foreign Affairs Ministry, our State Department, because here with us today is Ambassador Lisa Kubitsky, who has been absolutely instrumental in setting up the partnership. Thank you. Now, the President also mentioned the Panama Papers, and I do want to note that the disclosure of those papers, while painful to some, is a testament to a free and empowered press, something that is important in all of our countries. And the Panama Papers didn't just turn on the light the way the President said. They shone a stark spotlight on issues of illicit financial activities. We have a saying in the U.S., never waste a good crisis. And I think that the Panama Papers have given us momentum towards stricter enforcement of existing international anti-money laundering and anti-corruption laws, but also an opportunity to identify loopholes and fill them where they exist. And the PIF is one facet of an international response. I won't claim it's solely the Panama Papers, but certainly they've given some lift under our wings. The PIF also shown a different type, or the PIF focuses on a different type of spotlight. The Panama Papers expose the bad behavior. The PIF gives us an opportunity to shine a spotlight on the positive things that African nations are doing to rid ourselves of the scourge of corruption. It's also important to put the PIF in a broader context. Last year, we were so proud of the fact that the Addis Tax Initiative was launched. Also, at home, the Obama administration has rolled out, as part of its PIF action plan, a broad array of measures aimed at addressing shortfalls that we have domestically. And I think that that's an important message. The issues of illicit finance, of corruption, are not solely the bailiwick of emerging market economies. It's a scourge in every single one of our economies. You had mentioned that there were a number of countries that are already members, and I do think it's worth listing them because they span the continent. Burkina Faso, Kenya, Liberia, Mauritius, Niger, Senegal, Sierra Leone. And we should thank absolutely every one of them. But I also want to extend an invitation. We would absolutely love to see all of the countries represented in this room signing up. We've received many expressions of interest, and certainly the entire U.S. government team that is here is willing to engage so that we can have the PIF be even broader, and so that we can, in October, and certainly at next year's annual meeting, have an even more crowded room and stage. Thank you.
Actually, if you could hang on to your microphone, Ms. Lago, because that gives us a broad overview. You've listed the countries, and we're taking people through the steps of the national action plans, right? And we understand what they are now. And you've told us, you've all given us some, beautiful outlines for why this is so important. What happens once you have a national action plan? There are just two of you with national action plans. So what's the next step? How do you implement? No, if you could go ahead and tell us. Thank you.
I was worried that people would be hearing too much of me. Okay, so in setting up our national action plan, we have worked across our agencies. We have an extremely complicated government structure, as so many of us do. And when I say across our agencies, it is not just our foreign affairs, our finance ministry. It is also our justice, our law enforcement agencies. But it goes far beyond just government. We've also involved civil society. We've involved the private sector. They are absolutely essential partners. Now, as you mentioned, we do have our National Action Plan. It is up on the African Development Bank's website, and we are looking forward over the coming weeks and months. We anticipate that there are going to be a lot more. Now, some of the actions that we're taking domestically will give you a sense of the challenges that we face. We are known for being a country that has a rule of law, that has a very strong corporate sector, and yet we had a number of significant drawbacks, but the one that I'll highlight is an absence of transparency around the beneficial ownership of entities. And what does that do? Without knowing who are the real people, the human beings, it actually facilitates bad actors as they try to hide their assets. So President Obama in recent weeks unveiled a number of measures. One is we're going to seek legislation that requires the collection of information about beneficial ownership for any legal entity in the United States. That is going to require an act of Congress, and so it is a heavy lift, but we've committed ourselves to that. We are engaging our financial institutions, and we are a global financial center, to clarify and strengthen their customer due diligence obligations when they take on a new customer. And again, this is coupled with a requirement to identify the beneficial ownerships or the beneficial owners of certain of their customers that are legal entities. What we are hoping to do is to set out in the coming weeks and months a roadmap that by 2020 would require enhanced public disclosure of who are the beneficial owners of oil, mining, and gas companies, because we know that is a sector where there have been, that holds many opportunities for corruption. I had mentioned earlier the power of a free press. Earlier this year, the New York Times, or I believe it might have been late last year, the New York Times did a groundbreaking series of stories about how real estate was being used for money laundering. Again, an example of a free and open press. It was quite embarrassing for many reading about this. But what we have done is, using existing authorities, we have undertaken a pilot program in two cities with very expensive real estate, my hometown of New York City and Miami. And we are now requiring information about beneficial owners of very high price real estate when the transaction is in all cash. And so this should give a sense of the types of activities that we're undertaking domestically.
Thank you, Ms. Lago. We'll now come to government transparency. And Mr. Conte, I'll start with you, because you're, of course, working on your national action plan. So what specific challenges does Sierra Leone face that you're trying to address?
Thank you, moderator. I would like to join my Senegalese colleague in thanking the U.S. Treasury, the President and the ADB, and Mr. President, to further underscore Sierra Leone's support to your presidency, and to especially your high fives, and to thank our host, Zambia, for this opportunity to share experiences. I think I need not delve on the justifications of why we're here. I mean, my colleague in Senegal has clearly elucidated the justifications. But as a government, by way of context, Sierra Leone government we are working to come out of fragility. We are all aware of the Sierra Leone story in the recent past. Just before 2013, we were ranked as one of the few countries in Africa with double-digit growth in GDP. And then came 2013, we had first attack, or what we call the first shock, the collapse in the prices of our major export, iron ore. And then in 2014, we had the Ebola virus disease cutting through Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. So because of these two shocks, a country that was in 2013 ranked as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, suddenly contracted by well over 20%. As I speak, GDP for this year is projected at below 4%, and the depreciation of the leone against major currencies like the US dollar predicted to reach about 16%. So what we are doing as a government is to come out of this fragility by developing a resilient governance structure that will ensure that the lessons from those two shocks are not properly learned and prepare the economy to be much more stronger moving forward. So when it comes specifically, or responding specifically to the issue of governance, I must further comment that the three issues, governance, corruption, and transparency, there is an overlap. So whatever may I suggest, what I will put forward may likely go through the three issues. But two issues stand out in our effort at recovering or putting the economy back on track. One is the issue of multinationals, which Mr. President clearly commented on. I think we face the issue of tax avoidance and tax evasion, especially when it comes to telecoms. A few years back, Sierra Leone passed the Freedom of Information Bill, and we have been inundated as a government for access into the tax revenues that is coming from telecoms. And of late, realized that that is an avenue that is very challenging for the government. Reason being, we lack the expertise. How do you actually audit the calls, the termination rates of telecoms? These are multinationals. We have a revenue authority that's severely handicapped vis-a-vis determining the revenue streams and the appropriate tax applicable. That is one area that is affecting governance. Another issue I would need to mention when it comes to governance in our effort at putting the economy back on track, Mr. President used the acronym of transparency in PFN. We call it policing government expenditures in this recent times. And one area we've been emphasizing over the last couple of months is ensuring that each government worker, being them in the security sector, mainstream civil service, they have an account to which their month-end salaries are paid. We've come to the realization that the government payroll has a lot of non-existent workers, ghost workers. So that is one area that is challenging. We faced or confronted as a nation with a lot of infrastructural issues. That presupposes, or that requirement presupposes there has to be a bank in each town or each region of Sierra Leone, and that is not the case. So these are the issues we are contending with as a government. What we have done, if I may add briefly, when it comes to the issue of taxation avoidance and evasion by multinationals, especially in the telecoms, what we have done is to build capacity in the Revenue Authority. We've contacted development partners to provide technical assistance to help us independently audit the operations of these telecoms and see whether we can, on our own individual accord, independently ascertain the revenue streams and the appropriate taxes applicable. When it comes to the issues of opening government accounts, what we have done in the last few weeks, last couple of months, is to ensure as a first measure there is a task force that comprises the Ministry of Finance, the Anti-Corruption Commission, and the Supreme Audit Institution that is out there.
We hear that corruption fights back. So what challenges have you faced? Because you understand your problem, you're trying to address it, but clearly your implementation must be facing some blowback.
Well, again, on the issue of corruption, which I'll be delving into later, I think it's a perception thing. As long as corruption remains driven by perception measure, that is a debate for another day. But I think as a country, we have moved from that point where we are perceived to be highly corrupt. We have moved upwardly, improving the trend in corruption. Yes, of course, there are challenges. For instance, when you look at the payroll, why will a teacher in a remote village carry a payroll of 20 school teachers when in actual fact there are 10 actually teaching? So what we are doing in this first instance is to ensure heads of institution on a monthly basis, they certify that yes, my payroll with these names are true and correct. So when the investigation team comes in and they find otherwise, you are personally held culpable. So these are measures we are putting in place. When it comes to the telecoms, as I was saying, we have engaged development partners. Capacity building is ongoing. We are ensuring that the Revenue Authority is adequately capacitated to interrogate the systems, the software platform of these telecoms, with the view to ascertaining the revenue streams and the appropriate tax that is applicable. I think one thing that is standout from my Senegalese colleagues I share as well is the fact that all of this is driven by one desire as far as the government of Sierra Leone is concerned. We need to mobilize domestic resources for us to diversify the economy of Sierra Leone. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you. Madam Yaka, I come to you with apologies for getting your title wrong. She's not the Director of Budget, she's actually the Minister, the Honorable Minister of Economy and Finance. When it comes to corruption in Burkina Faso, what exactly are you trying to address through your national action plan? Corruption, but also loss of revenue due to crime.
Merci bien, Madame la modératrice. Je voudrais donc remercier les organisateurs de ce panel qui nous donnent l'occasion de qui me donne l'occasion aujourd'hui de partager l'expérience de mon pays, le Burkina Faso, avec l'ensemble des acteurs ici présents. Et je voudrais dire que je suis le ministre délégué auprès du ministre de l'Économie, des Finances et du Développement, chargé du budget. Donc c'est elle-même, Madame Koulibaly Souri, qui avait été invitée à ce panel et qui, pour des contraintes de calendrier, n'a pas pu venir. Donc je la supplée donc à ce panel pour parler donc de l'expérience de mon pays. Et je dirais que la lutte contre la corruption, on n'a plus à démontrer son importance. C'est un phénomène qui a beaucoup d'ampleur. Et les conséquences sont énormes et nuisibles pour le développement donc, de nos pays. Donc c'est pourquoi nous avons adhéré et avec en tout cas beaucoup de conviction à cette organisation qui est mise en place pour partager donc les expériences et se soutenir à travers donc des plans d'action et des échanges d'expériences pour pouvoir booster ce phénomène. Et au Burkina Faso, le défi est clair, c'est pouvoir en tout cas traquer le phénomène de la corruption et de la lutte contre la corruption. Et à ce titre-là, qu'est-ce que nous avons fait concrètement? Depuis donc les échanges qui ont eu lieu en 2014, nous avons tenté de mettre en place un plan d'action qui n'est pas encore totalement ficelé parce qu'il reste encore des concertations pour faire adhérer l'ensemble des acteurs pour que ce soit un plan d'action reconnu par tous, accepté de tous, pour que la mise en œuvre puisse être plus facile. Et donc, en 2015, nous avons pu, au titre donc de la lutte contre la corruption, adopter un certain nombre de textes. Et nous avons adopté une loi sur la prévention et la répression de la corruption. Et au titre de cette loi-là, pour faciliter la mise en œuvre, nous avons dû également, au cours de l'année 2016, en avril dernier, adopter un certain nombre de textes réglementaires pour permettre donc l'application. Et au titre de ces textes réglementaires, je peux citer le texte sur le délit d'apparence, donc qui fixe les conditions pour lesquelles, à partir desquelles on peut parler de délit d'apparence pour un individu, et également lui donner le droit de s'expliquer par rapport donc à son niveau, à son train de vie qui n'est pas conforme à son revenu. Et également un décret a été pris pour que les hautes personnalités de l'État, à l'entrée de leurs fonctions, puissent déclarer leurs biens auprès des hautes juridictions et également à la fin donc de leur mission également puissent justifier des biens qu'ils ont acquis. Et il y a également un autre décret que nous avons mis en place en avril dernier et qui est relatif aux cadeaux, aux dons, la limite qui puisse être tolérable. Et également en termes de loi, nous avons révisé la loi qui mettait en place l'autorité supérieure de contrôle de l'État. Et nous l'avons révisé pour lui ajouter les attributions relatives à la lutte contre la corruption. Et également, au titre donc toujours de la lutte contre la corruption, nous avons prévu que ce n'est pas encore, ça est dans le plan d'action, mais nous sommes là-dessus en termes d'échange pour permettre sa mise en œuvre, la création d'une agence nationale de recouvrement et de gestion des produits des crimes économiques et financiers. Donc cette agence-là va permettre donc de traquer les différents criminels, si je peux me prononcer ainsi. Et également, nous sommes dans la dynamique de renforcer l'indépendance de la justice et son efficacité à travers des réorganisations de la justice et pour également former certains acteurs de la justice sur le domaine des crimes économiques et également des pools judiciaires spécialisés vont être mis en place pour permettre donc de traquer ces délinquants économiques. Et il y a quelque chose aussi que je tiens à ajouter et qui a été évoqué par Madame des États-Unis, c'est la presse. Également, nous comptons beaucoup sur la presse et dans le plan d'action, c'est ressorti que nous allons avoir besoin de l'accompagnement de la presse et surtout celle d'investigation. Et à ce titre-là, le Burkina Faso apporte des subventions annuelles à la presse privée pour leur permettre en tout cas d'avoir les moyens de travailler efficacement et d'accompagner. Il y a également la mise en place d'un fonds d'appui à la presse qui a été mis en place cette année. Tout ça pour permettre à la presse d'être efficace et d'accompagner.
Merci. Mr. Giopa, I'll come to you. If you could very briefly, we're running out of time and it's important for us to engage with the panelists. If you could very briefly tell us, I've seen your National Action Plan, it was in French, and so I'm not sure that I understood it very well, which is why I ask you the question. You have all these wonderful steps in place to address, corruption and the monies you're losing through criminal activity. What obstacles do you foresee in your implementation?
Merci, Madame la modératrice. Je voudrais d'abord dire que pour le Sénégal, notre plan d'action, il est élaboré, validé et aujourd'hui accroché sur le site de la BAD. Je voudrais rappeler deux niveaux. D'abord, le niveau juridique. Au niveau du cadre juridique, je voudrais rappeler des actions qui ont été déjà faites et des actions en cours comme des actions envisagées. Sur les actions déjà faites, je voudrais rappeler l'adoption de la loi 2012-27 du 27 décembre 2012 portant code de transparence dans la gestion des finances publiques, qui est une internalisation d'une directive communautaire au sein de l'UMOA et qui induit des innovations majeures en termes de déclaration de patrimoine aujourd'hui pour les acteurs publics. Les gestionnaires de fonds publics, comme Madame du Burkina l'a dit, à l'entrée de fonction, font leur déclaration de patrimoine auprès de l'Office national de contrôle de la corruption et à la sortie également. Et les évolutions de patrimoine qui n'auraient aucun lien avec les revenus connus, les revenus légaux, devraient faire l'objet de justification. Et l'OFNAC a un pouvoir d'autosaisine, notamment du tribunal. Je voudrais rappeler également l'adoption d'un code d'éthique et de déontologie pour les acteurs publics et les élus. C'est important qu'on fixe les règles de procédure. Qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire, qui doit le faire, comment on doit le faire, avec un encadrement précis. Je voudrais également insister sur l'extension des pouvoirs du Parlement et de la Cour des comptes. L'Assemblée nationale aujourd'hui a vu ses pouvoirs de contrôle de l'action publique élargis et nous avons institué depuis 3 ans bientôt déjà au Sénégal. C'est des actions qui étaient déjà en cours mais qui ont été consolidées dans le plan d'action du Sénégal, le débat d'orientation budgétaire.
Mr. Diop, those are the steps, but do you anticipate... Okay, bon. No, my French isn't good enough to construct the question. Those are the steps, and they're great. We're hearing similar commitments from the countries on this panel. But the obstacles, do you not foresee any sort of challenges to your attempts to clean up your financial act?
Mais tout à fait, Madame la modératrice. Et je voudrais dire à ce niveau, peut-être faire appel à ce qu'on appelle communément l'économie politique des réformes. Parce que dans nos pays, en général, on sait de quoi on a des problèmes, de quoi on est malade. On connaît à peu près les solutions, mais la mise en œuvre bute sur des résistances, la résistance au changement. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, la corruption, c'est une activité économique souterraine. Alors qu'il nous faut la combattre pour favoriser l'économie formelle qui est porteur de développement. Mais naturellement, c'est des intérêts qu'on remet en cause. Même si c'est des intérêts illicites, même si c'est des intérêts occultes, c'est des bandes organisées, c'est des lobbies, c'est des groupes d'intérêts qui peuvent avoir un niveau d'influence et de pression, que ce soit au niveau social tout court, au niveau religieux, au niveau économique, sur les gouvernants. Et à ce niveau, je crois qu'au Sénégal, c'est la réalité, il faut le dire, c'est pas facile. On a initié, et ça je passe au plan institutionnel, la Cour de répression de l'enrichissement illicite. Vous avez suivi l'actualité. Aujourd'hui, Madame du Burkina l'a dit, nous avons un procès que je ne reviens pas dessus. Il y a d'autres dossiers qui sont pendants, mais sur lesquels il nous faudrait avancer. Nous avons institué l'OFNAC, je l'ai dit tout de suite, en donnant à l'OFNAC une autonomie dans sa gestion, mais un pouvoir d'autosaisine. L'OFNAC, c'est l'Office national de lutte contre la corruption, qui peut être saisi avec une source protégée. Les sources sont protégées. Ça veut dire vous donnez l'information à l'OFNAC, naturellement cette source elle est protégée. Et l'OFNAC peut enquêter sur vos biens et conséquemment saisir directement les juridictions pour vous traduire au tribunal. Il y a également, il faudra le dire, la Direction centrale des marchés publics et l'autorité de régulation des marchés publics. Pourquoi ces deux organes? Parce qu'il est avéré que beaucoup de cas de corruption restent liés aux marchés publics, au regard des volumes en jeu, parce que l'essentiel des volumes budgétaires sont exécutés par voie de marché, et le Sénégal a institué une réforme qui a consacré ces deux organes. Aujourd'hui, tout acteur de la passation de marché public qui pense que ses intérêts ont été lésés peut saisir ces organes pour demander qu'ils soient rétablis dans ses droits et saisir conséquemment les tribunaux. Voilà ce que je voulais dire en rappelant aussi, Madame la modératrice, si vous permettez, l'initiative pour la transparence sur les industries extractives. C'est très important dans le contexte sénégalais, d'autant plus que nous venons aujourd'hui de découvrir que nous avons des ressources en gaz et des ressources en pétrole. Et il est avéré aujourd'hui que pour l'essentiel des pays africains, du fait de trafic illicite, du fait de corruption, ces ressources naturelles ne profitent pas véritablement aux populations africaines. Et le Sénégal a prévu de réformer son cadre juridique en nous inspirant de ce qui s'est fait par ailleurs dans d'autres pays africains pour que ces ressources qui viennent découvertes puissent profiter véritablement aux populations sénégalaises. Voilà ce que je voulais dire à ce niveau. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Diop.
I could just quickly, I was struck by how on point your question is about the obstacles, and I think that there's a similarity in what we've all been expressing. One is the challenge of passing legislation when entrenched interests are benefiting from the current. The second is, as hard as it is to pass legislation, then getting the resources for effective implementation. And then the third is the reality that corruption and illicit activity knows no borders. And so I think the third obstacle is the need to cooperate across borders.
Thank you. Thank you so much, actually, Madam Lago. And so we come to Kenya and Mr. Rotich. We're both Kenyan, and we know that there are escalating levels of frustration with corruption. Not just corruption, but impunity and accountability. So as you work on Kenya's National Action Plan, what specific challenges are you addressing?
Thank you very much. Again, let me join my previous panelists for thanking the U.S. government and the African Development Bank for organizing this very important talk on illicit finance. Again, I have been involved in the past, especially the work with what Thabo Mbeki has done, and in many forums we have actually shared Kenyan experience in many forums. So what are we doing in Kenya? First, we may not have a very clear national action plan like my colleagues in Senegal and also the US, but we're heading there. We are sort of implementing our own intervention, which is along the lines of what has been mentioned by the previous speakers. But I want to say that we have recognized this challenge of illicit finance flow in Kenya. As you know, one of the critical pillars of our financial reform is enhancing financial integrity. This is one of the key components of our financial reform. Secondly, we have been a victim of insecurity, and we have faced big challenges because of the illicit nature of the flows that have actually ended up financing terrorism in Kenya. So it's out of those that has made us very aggressive in tackling this problem. And I'll just highlight some of the areas that we are now doing in Kenya. First of all, I think the issue of tax evasion. We've had this challenge in Kenya for a while. We have now signed up with international agencies and sharing of information in international forum to deal with this issue of transfer of pricing, over invoicing and all that, which denies us some revenues that we need to finance our development agenda. And I must say that there is a lot of work. We are now capacitating the Kenya Revenue Authority to be able to detect these practices that have been done that denies Kenya the much needed resources. So that's an area that we are now, and we see that we are going to raise some significant amount of resources on this. The other area is on combating corruption, which you've just mentioned. As you know, we have been always in the corruption perception index. Kenya has been not in a very good level. Challenges been really perception issue, just been said, and also real corruption. This is made us really to act very swiftly on this. And I would like also to thank the cooperation we are working with the U.S. in the support of this. So just in the areas of corruption, we have made a lot of progress. I think we've managed to pass the necessary legislations. That has been a good plus. But legislations alone is not really, cannot help you deal with the problem if you don't implement them. And so we have past that, we have institutions, the anti-corruption institutions. We have independent institutions like the Directorate of Public Prosecution, independent judiciary. So we have actually legislations and the institutions. I think the challenge now is really implementing. And one of the areas that we have also seen is that there have been a challenge of coordination of all these institutions. I think we ended up setting up many institutions and also like the coordination. So one area that we have now of late done a lot is the coordination of all governance institutions, right, from those who are detecting financial flaws, which is the Financial Reporting Center, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the DPP, the judiciary. So all this has now helped to deal with the problem. And we have seen significant progress recently, where we have actually, for the first time, taken almost 300 cases to court, unlike none in the past. So this is just out of the work of just effective coordination of these institutions. So this has worked very well. We have also engaged the public sector, the private sector. The private sector has also been in the forefront for this. And as you know, one of the issues that was brought out very clearly is that most of the corruption in Kenya is associated with the procurement. And I think Senegal just mentioned here, almost 90% actually is the way we manage our procurement. And we have now tried to automate the procurement, change the procurement law, and deal with that area. The private sector also are signing up on the code of ethics. Those who will be participating in government procurement, they have to sign a code of ethics to abide by. And also, more recently, we have taken a very important bill. That is the UK-style bill of the anti-bribery bill. Now is on its way to Parliament for passage of that, and which again will go a long way to deal with the challenge. Now, on the area of movement of cash, you know that we have introduced a limit. The amount of cash that can be transported, both can be withdrawn from the from banks, and also that we can be carried out of Kenya or inside Kenya with a maximum of $10,000. So this is also a very move that we have already implemented. Now the other area on illicit trade, as you know, recently Kenya banned ivory worth $300 million US. And this is a sign that we have really declared war on this illicit trade. I think other than that, many other things in terms of institutional revamping our institutions and coordinating with the international agencies. We are members of many institutions now that have been created, and I think we're making progress. So in a nutshell, we are going to now put together all this into our national action plan along along the lines of what Senegal has done and the US in terms of prevention of corruption, combating impunity.
And when will that be ready?
Very soon.
Great answer.
Okay. Liberia, Madam Gay, I come to you. Because you also have these challenges. You're like Sierra Leone, a fragile state emerging from conflict. So what are your specific challenges and how are you addressing them in your national action plan?
Thank you for...
It's on.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. I represent my finance minister that came to the conference and got seriously ill. And so he asked me to stand instead. But we in Liberia, what we're doing, I know all my colleagues have talked about the framework. We have all the framework. But some of the challenges as a fragile state is the capacity issue. How to, and then
And then one of our major problem is the frequent change in key government officials. So when you do these, we build this framework and time to implement, and then there's someone else that in that place. So it kind of takes long. But our obstacles mainly is the training and capacity. How do you put people in these places to be able to enforce these when their capacities are not built? Another thing that, and you will see that we try to do is, right now, if you read our dailies, there is implementation. How do we implement? And so that's one of our obstacles. But lately, our president has set up a task force, and that if you look at the news, that bringing some high-power officials to be able to account for some of these things.
Okay.
All right.
So how are you dealing with the training and capacity? Because that's a real problem, it seems, across several post-conflict states.
What we've done, like I'm coming from the external auditor, the GSC. What we've done, we set up programs that we can. And now we look at, instead of sending people out to train, bringing in trainers to train these, more than one. And then if you have about 10 people, at least 5, you can build that capacity. But when you send out 2, you spend a lot of money, and they may not have grasped the issue.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, Ms. Lago.
To highlight an initiative that Liberia undertook in partnership with the U.S., which goes to this issue of capacity building. The finance minister, an enlightened finance minister, realized that there would be value in separating a revenue authority outside of the finance ministry with a degree of independence. And so we sent a technical advisor to work hand in glove with the finance ministry for 3 years, figuring out that what was needed was a different pay structure so that it would attract folks who would be more resistant to corruption, who realized it would also need a public education campaign on the importance of collecting revenue and how it was a societal obligation. And I was just surprised in the most pleasant way that this revenue authority launched in the height of the Ebola crisis. It was ready to launch, and the government officials decided to go forward with it. But I do think the minister's representative puts her finger on the importance of having the trained, committed individuals within government.
To add to that, we have the anti-corruption commission also, and what they've done, they've put in you can go along the streets and they have billboards that make corruption awareness. They go to the schools and things like that, and they are.
On record our progress, because I seem to have been a bit disadvantaged. I think Sierra Leone as a country, I need to outline that we have one of the most robust anti-corruption regulations. Prior to 2007, it was a system whereby for you to be indicted by the ACC, it has to go through the Minister of Justice. After 2007, that was rectified. The ACC is fully empowered. They can pursue you, indict you, take you to court. And on record, I think the ACC last year had a 98% conviction. We also have a robust national procurement system wherein government contracts on competitive basis, and there is an independent procurement review panel. If you are aggrieved as a bidder, there is a redress. The panel serves as a source of redress. We also have a very robust independent Supreme Audit Institution. We are on record as one of the government with transparency when it comes to auditing public finance. I think that audience will recall the incident of the Ebola and the midstream auditing of those funds. That shows how willing we are as a government, that even though Ebola was raging, even though we are fighting, the books were open to the independent audits, the Supreme Audit Institution to examine. And also I would like to put on record that when it comes to the financial sector, the banks, there are procedures, there are regulations in place for enhanced customer due diligence to identify people, depositors, their source of funds, their origin, where they are coming from. But I would like to specifically, quickly, comment on the challenge when it comes to the international dimension of illicit financial flows. I think I need to underscore that the international community has a lot to play, because the global community, especially those jurisdictions that have secrecy in banking practice, I think there has to be a strong voice, a strong international voice for those secrecy laws to be eliminated. And also for the international community to speak with one voice, that when it comes to recovering assets that were the product of illicit financial flows, there should be corporations in repatriating those assets, especially to African countries. I need to underscore those 2 points, and thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So, Mr. Bwama, I'll come to you from the perspective of the African Development Bank, because quite a few of the panelists have talked about the role of the private sector and the role of civil society. So, we hear, countries facing, some challenges. Sierra Leone has an impressive 98% conviction record that some countries would do well to emulate. What advice would you give in terms of going forward and bringing everybody along on this partnership on illicit finance?
Thank you very much.
It is on.
It's on, yeah. Thank you, and let me say the problem with arriving after your boss has spoken is that you risk repeating what he has said, or maybe worse yet, you may contradict something. But in any case, I agree with everything he said. So that's the start. Let me start, and I'll answer the question. But I've listened very carefully to what has been said, and let me start with just a short story. I mean, and I'll not mention the country. There was a minister appointee, and going through the honorable minister from Burkina Faso talked about basically declaring your assets, which is good practice. So, of course, this appointee declared his asset. He had 5 mansions and I think 5 cars, including some couple of luxury cars. But unfortunately, they did they vetted the declaration, and it turned out he had 1 car and a 7-year-old vehicle, one vehicle, 1 house. Obviously, declaring the asset he expected to have at the end of his term. Yes. What's my point here? My point very simply is, it is not the absence of the rules. I mean, I think if you go across, there are rules and everything is there, but it's really the implementation. I think I've heard that repeatedly here in terms of the implementation. So I will start with, in terms of what we do, and I'm sure my boss talked about that as well. On the front end, in terms of the support we provide, I think Assistant Secretary Lago talked about the difficulty of funding in terms of putting in place these reforms. We've supported in a number of countries in terms of actually doing that. We've also provided support in whether it's in the Supreme Audit institutions in the countries, and more recently in even our procurement. We'll get into that hopefully later. I can talk some more about that. So there are these efforts that we are making to basically support our countries to fight corruption. And that's an ongoing effort on our part. Now, we have a number of countries, just a handful of countries really, that have signed up to the partnership. And I think our role, again, is on our website. But I think it's just publicizing that also just the advocacy for that is we see as part of our work to ensure that there is an embrace of this what we believe is a good practice. Yeah.
Before I go to the floor, Madame Yaka from Burkina Faso, please.
Oui. Non, juste pour réagir à ce que mon voisin a dit tout à l'heure par rapport à la déclaration des biens, c'est dire qu'effectivement, bon, il est possible donc qu'il n'y ait pas d'honnêteté en la matière et qu'il a donné un exemple de celui qui a déclaré plus qu'il n'en avait, mais il y a aussi ceux qui peuvent déclarer moins que ce qu'ils ont. Donc, à ce titre-là, au Burkina, après la déclaration des biens, il y a donc la possibilité qui est donnée donc aux structures habilitées à faire des enquêtes pour vérifier la véracité des déclarations qui ont été faites. Voilà. Donc c'était une précision que je voulais ajouter. Merci.
No, you don't have 1 minute because you're giving the floor less than 10 minutes to ask their questions and then for you to respond. So you can couch your response in whatever question you're responding to. Just before we come to the floor, the Ugandan Minister of Finance, Honorable Kasaija, had to leave. But this was his intervention. The floor is now open, so I'm starting with the minister who's not here. One, why do we allow banks to opening secret accounts to receive illicit funds? Remember the safe haven banks, bank accounts? And then two, there is an internal organization, internal or international, called the Financial Action Task Force, which is responsible for enforcing anti-money laundering and combating financing terrorism. Could we go the same way for illicit funds flow? So those are two questions. I'm not sure who's best placed to respond to that. And then Madam from Niger. Niger is one of the members of the PIF. Aishatou Khan, if we could hear from you.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Je suis Madame Aishatou Khan, ministre du Plan du Niger. Je voudrais vraiment saluer la tenue de ce panel. Je voudrais également saluer l'initiative qui a été lancée par le président Obama et le président Macky Sall, qui nous ont permis de mettre en place un partenariat pour le financement illicite. Je voudrais dire ici, en réalité, cette initiative est venue enfoncer une porte ouverte. Et pour ce qui concerne le Niger, nous sommes engagés dans cette initiative et nous confirmons notre engagement et notre volonté d'aller de l'avant. Je voudrais juste informer les participants que le Niger vit cette situation de financement illicite à un double, sinon triple point de vue. Le premier, c'est le financement illicite du terrorisme, pour lequel nous n'avons aucune maîtrise. Je veux dire que nous subissons de plein fouet le financement illicite du terrorisme. Et le deuxième aspect, c'est le financement illicite à l'interne. C'est ce que mes collègues ont eu à dire, tout ce qui est évasion fiscale, tout ce qui est corruption et autres concessions qui sévissent dans nos pays. Mais les deux aspects ont un impact négatif, très négatif sur notre développement. Et c'est de cela que je voulais un peu parler. Si vous prenez le cas du financement du terrorisme, au Niger, de 2011 à 2015, nous avons dû multiplier par plus de 10 nos dépenses en matière de sécurité pour lutter contre le terrorisme qui nous vient de la Libye, pour lutter contre l'insécurité qui nous vient du Mali, pour lutter contre Boko Haram. Donc voilà à quoi nous faisons face, tout simplement parce que quelque part, il y a des personnes qui se sont décidées à financer des groupes de terroristes qui sont venus donc perturber notre quiétude et perturber nos budgets, perturber fortement nos budgets. Donc, de l'autre côté, il y a les financements donc, illicites liés, que je place au niveau interne, donc l'évasion fiscale et la corruption. De ce point de vue, je pense que au Niger, nous avons fait des progrès depuis 2011. Nous avons mis en place la haute autorité de lutte contre la corruption et l'impunité, qu'on appelle HALCIA. Et d'ailleurs, depuis 2011, le Niger a gagné 28 places dans l'indice de perception de machin. On était 136e, maintenant on est 106e. 134e, maintenant on est à la 106e place. Et on compte continuer les efforts pour aller. Ce que je voulais dire, beaucoup l'ont dit ici, c'est que les institutions de lutte contre la pauvreté existent, contre la corruption et autres existent dans nos pays. Maintenant, il faut mettre tout cela en œuvre, il faut avoir la volonté politique de le faire. Et vous voyez, ce n'est pas un hasard si c'est le Sénégal, le Burkina Faso et autres pays de la CEDEAO qui sont là, qui sont engagés dans cela. Je pense qu'au plan régional, puisqu'on parle de partenariat sur le financement illicite, il faut qu'on puisse s'engager, parce qu'il ne faut pas qu'on fasse des plans d'action nationaux seulement. Il faut que nous puissions aller de l'avant dans le partenariat dans le cadre de notre intégration économique. Il faudrait aussi que le partenariat soit mondial, parce que le financement du terrorisme, madame, le financement du terrorisme ne vient pas de chez nous. Il faudrait qu'on puisse faire en sorte que le financement du terrorisme soit vraiment surveillé de très près, qu'on trouve des mesures adéquates pour que le financement du terrorisme ne vienne pas perturber nos développements. Merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. We have a minister from Norway, the State Secretary. Yes, please go ahead. Ton Skogen.
Very good. Thank you. Let me start by praising the launching of the partnership on illicit financing. So let me both thank and congratulate the countries behind the initiative. And I have, with great interest, listened to the African country representatives on actions already taken and on the perspectives of the way forward. I have also listened with equal interest to the bank representatives, both the president and the vice president. And I believe that the president used the expression that he was committed to. And I was very pleased to hear that, because I believe the bank should take on as big a role as possible in this very important global topic. And we have heard from the African countries what they are doing and all the perspectives. What I also would be interested in hearing is how they see the bank playing the most constructive role on this topic.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll take one. Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. My name is Ozonnea Ojelo. I am the Head of Governance and Peace Building in Africa for UNDP. So I'll simply transform my comments into questions to the panelists, and also to thank them for the launch of the National Action Plans. And so my first question is that the partnership is great, and all the discussion, it's about the illegal aspects of transactions. And yet, every government representative here spoke about the broader question of illicit financial flows. And you asked them a question that they haven't addressed. And your question was, what is the next step? So will the partnership hopefully evolve to addressing all of these big brother issues, which is the main constraint that we see in the
as we
continent
close,
today?
those next steps will be addressed.
Excellent.
Do you have any other questions?
The second question then, so to hear their thoughts on that, I think that's important.
Okay.
And then the second question, it's there was a global outrage around the Panama Papers, the leakage of the Panama Papers. And there was outrage in Africa, but in some circles it was a bit muted. And we need to deal with that. So my question to them then is, how are the governments planning to address the implications of all of that? And what kind of support will they be needing from institutions like the African Development Bank and UNDP? Mm-hmm. And then the final question.
No, sorry,
okay,
to be fair to other people.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Please pass the microphone behind you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Minister of Finance of Namibia. My name is Kalle Stetwein. I've got two basic questions. The one links up to what the colleague has said. My understanding of this partnership is that it excludes tax evasion and these aspects. And in fact, if you look at the report on illicit flows from His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, that constitutes more than 60% of the flows. So the question is, are we not settling the wrong horse? Okay. Or is it actually evolving into a system that also tackles that? Right. The second question I have is, when we had the governor's dialogue with the president of the ADB, under the topic of mobilizing funds for development, only 8% of governors thought that illicit flows is an important source to follow up. So I want to know from the bank, do you really think that we can muster the necessary support to tackle this problem when only 8% of all the governors think it is an important issue?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay. We don't have time. There's a gentleman right there who would like to ask a question. And what we'll do is respond to the questions, and that will be it. Okay. So very quickly, please, sir.
Bien, merci, madame. Je suis Koulibaly Adama directeur général du groupe intergouvernemental d'action contre le blanchiment d'argent en Afrique de l'Ouest, qui est un organisme, un groupe régional de style Gafi. Je remercie le ministre ougandais qui est sorti, qui a fait référence à cela, et me permet de poser la question suivante. Pour mettre en œuvre les recommandations du Gafi, notamment en matière de blanchiment des capitaux, financement du terrorisme, les États ont mis en leur sein des structures spécifiques appelées cellules de renseignement financier. Et je voudrais savoir quelle est la place ou quelle sera la place et le rôle de ces structures dans le partenariat sur les flux financiers illicites. Merci.
Thank you. So we have just 5 minutes to go, but we did start late. And so panelists, what I'd like you to do, please, is respond to the questions. And there's some specific questions to you. The bank, you know, whether you really have the will that you say you do, given the strong commitment, whether we're excluding tax evasion, and the global outreach regarding the Panama Papers, the implications. Mr. Rotich, I'll be unfair to you and ask you to respond to that. And Ms. Lago, if you have any perspective on that as well, that would be helpful. Mr. Conte, you had an intervention to make, and if you've got any perspective on these questions as well, please do respond. And in so doing, you'll be making your final thoughts as well. And I'll come back to you, Mr. Diop and Ms. Lago, to tell us how we're going forward, you know, with a partnership. Thank you.
Go start. Thank you very much. Actually, one thing I forgot during my intervention, and let me just add because I think it's very important, and what Senegal had just mentioned is that we've also made very good progress in recovering assets abroad. We've worked very closely with the UK government in one of the 2 cases, and we are now actually budgeting the projects that we need to use for the recovered money. So this is really a very good sign that we are making progress in this area. Now, I just wanted to, as I respond on the questions, also to say something about what Norway mentioned about what should the bank really do. And I think in the area of tax evasion, we would really want to see how the bank can build our capacities of our tax agencies, particularly the revenue agencies. This area of tax evasion is a very complex area. It involves, you know, international lawyers. It involves, you know, very sophisticated actors. And I know in the report of Thabo Mbeki, they have mentioned some sort of program of how they can address this. So I think capacity building of the revenue agencies will be an area that the bank should really pick and support. I think, and also, you know, in light of what is happening in the Panama Papers and all that, I think we will need to constantly, you know, strengthen our legal and institutional framework to address emerging challenges. I know we are in the process of revising our anti-money laundering laws to address new emerging issues, especially, you know, the issues of Panama and the way you know, how this money actually moves around the globe, particularly the role of, you know, international lawyers in getting all this money, and also local players. So this is an area where I think more reforms should focus. I think also, lastly, I know this is a very big agenda, you know, in terms of this issue of illicit financing. I think what will really be important is that we need to target you know, the very risky areas. I think the issue of security financing of terrorism are very important. These are areas that we need to give priority to deal best way of compacting a flow of funds that finance terrorism. Because this topic is so wide, we need just to target and prioritize, and then move to other areas at a later stage. So the issue really is which are the big areas, tax evasion and financing of terrorism, which we should put more emphasis on. Thank you.
Mr. Conte?
Yeah, my first intervention was to comment on if you declare your assets falsely in Sierra Leone, it's an offense because you declare under oath. That's my only comment. Then I think, responding to a few of the questions, I think the international community has a lot to do when it comes to illicit financial flows. Not only has it created awareness, foremost, I think it brings to the fore that we need to redefine what is corruption. IFF is corruption. It is corruption in broad daylight. Two, I think there is a need for fundamental change in international banking practice, responding to the second question. Secrecy in banking operations must be eliminated. Beneficial owners must be defined, their source of income must be stated, their country of birth and origin stated and published and made publicly available. On the other question of whether the FATF should cover the IFF illicit financial flows, I think that's a good recommendation from the Honorable Minister who left as well. My concluding remarks is to re-echo the fact that there is need for cooperation. Illicit financial flows doesn't involve one jurisdiction. It involves multiple jurisdictions. It involves multiple entities, accountants, lawyers, bankers, tax advisors, so there is need for cooperation across the board. Hence, the ADB should look at creating a special financing window to create capacity in African institutions, especially in fragile states. Thank you very much.
And so, Mr. Boma, is that a yes from you? Are you creating this facility as you respond to the challenges?
No, I said that to start with the minister from Namibia's comments, and if I was a comment I was going to make about the scope, that the illicit, obviously, this is a good start. But clearly, what we're talking about here, and because the ultimate objective is domestic resource mobilization to essentially finance development needs. And a lot of the leakages are not necessarily illicit. But they are odious nonetheless. And so the point, I agree completely about the scope that it is also addressing issues of tax evasion and so forth. Now let me say some of the things about very quickly, and I'll just rapid fire. There's the, of course, the African Legal Support Facility. Some of you are familiar with that. That is dealing with just essentially providing legal assistance to ensure fairer, contracts, etc., and so that addresses an aspect of leakages. In the area of natural resource management, we have the African Natural Resource Center that, again, is in the area of natural resources assisting there as well. Many times, I think my co-panelists have referred to beneficial ownership. And I think Assistant Secretary Lago talked about that. We just recently reviewed our procurement procedures, and we are working with our countries and requiring essentially in their procedures to include required disclosures of beneficial ownership. So that's yet another aspect that we're dealing with. There was a specific question about the 8% response rate and the question really to which we had this 8% was really what should the bank be focusing most on to raise resources to assist in essentially meeting the high five agenda. The number one was, of course, trying to crowd in more private sector research, a whopping 50-something%. Now, it was 8% for the, but our interpretation of that is not that it is not important. It was just that the respondents basically said, well, this crowding in more private sector is what you need to do. Just to provide assurance that it is as important to us in the work we do, I've already provided some examples. We continue to strongly assist, and I think the Honorable Minister from Kenya talked about providing assistance to tax revenue authorities, etc. We've done that in Togo. We've done that in, I think, a few other countries. So these are all many, many aspects. So it's extremely important. And on the FATFA style, maybe time doesn't permit, but we are actually revising, coming up with a new anti-IFF policy, which will be the sort of the platform to provide the kind of support that I think many ministers have talked about. Let me stop here. I know we have run out of time.
Our official time is over, Mr. Diop, but I'm giving the floor to you and Ms. Lago to tell us what the next steps are. So I would ask you to be brief because it's already 4 o'clock. And I think in terms of the next steps, this question by Sarah, a lawyer in Zambia, helps us move forward. Will the partnership guidelines be binding on member countries, for instance, in situations that require automatic exchange of information and documentation rules?
Merci, Madame la modératrice. Je voudrais d'abord, avant peut-être de passer au mot de la fin, répondre à quelques questions qui ont été soulevées par certains intervenants. Je crois qu'à entendre les uns et les autres, on sait tous ce qu'il faut faire, aussi bien au plan juridique qu'au plan institutionnel, mais que le véritable défi se pose en termes de mise en œuvre. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Nous savons, mais comment il faut le faire? Et vous m'avez posé tout de suite une question sur les défis. Je crois que dans le cas spécifique du Sénégal, il est clair que des réformes de cette envergure qui remettent en cause des intérêts futiles, des intérêts occultes, butent sur des résistances. Et nous avons estimé dans le cadre du Sénégal, peut-être à raison, qu'une plus grande implication de la société civile, des organisations internationales, du secteur privé, pourrait permettre de soustraire l'autorité politique qui a souvent en perspective un agenda politique, donc qui est plus sensible aux contingences sociales, religieuses, aux groupes de pression internes en termes d'électorat que peut-être ces acteurs de la société civile, ces organisations internationales. Nous avons également pensé dans le cadre du Sénégal que le renforcement des capacités doit être une voie principale.
I'm going to interrupt because we're winding up. Please tell us what the next steps are. We've heard about Senegal. You know, so take us forward. We want more countries to sign up, so help us encourage them to sign up. Thank you.
OK. Merci bien, Madame la modératrice. Vous me permettrez quand même, j'insiste, de répondre à une question qui a été posée. Je dirais, bon d'accord, c'est bon, on va continuer. Oui. Sur les prochaines étapes, nous pensons qu'il faudrait que les pays, aujourd'hui membres déjà qui adhèrent à l'initiative, finalisent et adoptent leur plan d'action. Et nous invitons par la même occasion les autres pays qui présentent un intérêt du fait de cette participation massive à adhérer à l'initiative. Nous estimons aussi qu'il est nécessaire d'articuler cette initiative, aujourd'hui qui est co-leadée entre les États-Unis et le Sénégal et les autres pays membres de l'initiative, aux autres initiatives qui existent, notamment l'initiative de haut niveau initiée au niveau de l'Union africaine et qui est présidée par le président Thabo Mbeki. Le renforcement et l'implication de la société civile et du secteur privé et des organisations internationales. Je suis heureux que la BAD soit à nos côtés aujourd'hui pour porter ce projet et nous invitons des organisations comme la Banque mondiale, le FMI, le PNUD à adhérer aux côtés des États pour nous accompagner. Inviter également aujourd'hui tous les pays africains parce que plusieurs combats sur la voie du développement sont à mener, mais nous estimons que s'il y a un combat qui vaille aujourd'hui, c'est ce combat contre les flux financiers illicites au regard des dégâts importants qu'ils portent à nos économies en termes de développement. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diop. Ms. Lago?
I think that there are 4 next steps. The first is to realize that this is a partnership of the willing. It's not a rule-setting body. But having said that, it's up to us, the members of the partnership, to define what is illicit finance. We can talk about money laundering, financing terrorism, illicit finance. There are not bright lines up between them. And so it's up to us, those who willingly join, to take this concept of illicit finance and give it substance. That's the first. The second, to repeat what the minister said, current members, let's take advantage of transparency that the president called for and get our plans up on the African Development Bank's website. Third, encourage new members. Why is this so important? Because of number 4. We are all in this together. There will be countries that may look upon this as an opportunity to weaken their standards and have a race to the bottom. So let's join hands across the continent and then globally to fight illicit finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel, if we could show our appreciation for their expertise. And as we close, I'll leave you with this proverb, which will be familiar to many of us. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So the Partnership on Illicit Finance would like to go as far as possible to stem the illegal movement of Africa's finances. But these eight countries cannot do it by themselves. They need the rest of Africa on board, so do please sign up. My name is Udwa Kamimo. Thank you for your time and attention.